Next speaker is John Stauffer, Eritrean refugees in Tigray. You're welcome.
Hello, everyone. Atrocities, regrettably, are all too common in the world, but there are elements of the atrocities in Tigray that are uncommon. There are potential remedies for those atrocities that are equally uncommon. That's what we'll talk about today, and that's the message that we'd like to share, that what we're seeing in Tigray is uncommon and that we cannot allow it to stand. Now, our organization, the American Team for Displaced Eritreans, was established in 2010 to help Eritrean refugees and asylum seekers in the United States and around the world. In the case of Tigray, we have procured safety or temporary safety for many refugees on the ground there, and have communicated continuously with our own government's officials about what's happening on the ground and what might be done to ameliorate it. Because Tigray is just over the Eritrean border, it was the first place that many refugees would arrive when fleeing the vast human rights depravities in their own country. At many times, the refugee flow was intense, with tens of thousands of refugees arriving within short periods of time. For many years prior to the war, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and a range of international NGOs had supported several camps in Tigray that housed Eritrean refugees. Many of those refugees would then remain in the camps. They stayed because they couldn't return safely to Eritrea. They would be punished severely for having fled the country, and onward migration was fraught with danger and uncertain livelihood. For many, the refugee camps became their semi-permanent homes. On the eve of the war in Tigray, nearly 100,000 Eritrean refugees were living in the camps in Tigray. Eritrean troops entered Ethiopia in early November 2020, assisting the federal government in the vicious assault on the Tigray government and people. But the Eritrean objective included something else: to get at the refugees who had fled Eritrea over the past 20 years. Within weeks, Eritrean forces attacked the two northernmost camps, Hitsats and Shemelba. Some refugees were killed, some by execution. The full number is unknown. Others were reportedly conscripted immediately and to join the ranks of Eritrean soldiers at the front. Yet other refugees, reportedly thousands, were abducted or otherwise compelled to return to Eritrea, the very country from which they had fled. Those abducted were and are at grave risk of being severely punished for having fled their country, being imprisoned, tortured, or even killed. That is the way of the Eritrean regime. They were and are at grave risk of being conscripted into the brutal, slave-like Eritrean military service, and even being sent back to the front in Tigray as cannon fodder. At the front, they could be ordered to commit the cruel atrocities that have characterized the war. Those abducted will certainly have lost whatever personal freedoms and personal security they had in the refugee camps prior to the war. Those abducted have been returned to Eritrea, to Eritrea's domain, which for them is simply hell on earth. And other atrocities face the refugees. Shortly after the war began, UNHCR and international NGO staffs had to flee from the camps for their lives. Eritrean and Ethiopian forces blocked humanitarian access to not only the two northern camps, but also to the two southern ones, Bayani and Adi-Harush. Eritrean forces pillaged and obliterated Hitsats and Shemelba camps. Many of the refugees who escaped the destruction scattered to Sudan, to towns in Tigray, to Addis Ababa, and elsewhere in Ethiopia. Many who had made it to Addis were forcibly returned by the Ethiopian government to the southern camps, only miles from continuing menace by Eritrean forces. Others were abducted at checkpoints, moving about in Tigray and in Addis by Eritrean security agents. What has become of most of those abducted is unknown. Many who are living elsewhere in Tigray outside the camps continue to suffer from a woeful insufficiency of food, shelter, and medical care. Refugees continue to be abducted to Eritrea. To be sure, for a time, at the Mayaini and Adi Harush camps, sporadic attacks by Tigrayan militias and individuals occurred. Incidents included harassment, looting, robbery, murder, and rape. We are told that many of those attacks were motivated by a vengeance against Eritrean refugees because Eritrean forces were savaging Tigray. These attacks were apparently not coordinated, strategic, or sustained. Now my colleague Mike Slotsnik will pick up from here with some additional observations.
Thank you.